Here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Go, go for a wild, wild ride with the honey badgers, but beware, the sweetest kittens have the sharpest claws. For your own safety, strap yourselves in and hold on to something as we enter the Pussycat Cast. Wild women, wild opinions, unladylike oratory aggression. The Pussycat Cast delivers tons more than the competition. This week's verbal Valkyries are our polecat punster turned part-time pussycat pugilist Hannah, the principled, passionate, plucky, and pleasant Prim Reaper, the smokin' and drankin' Rantzerker herself, Karen Strawn, and me.
There was no alliteration there.
No,
oh my God.
I just, you know,
My dog just stole a bottle of vodka. Just hang on a second.
And me, the pickle and egg, apparently, in this clam bake, myself, the Supreme Doge in charge. Today we have a collection of interesting stories that we're going to look at. So, without further ado, allow me to please jump right into the topics. Oh my God, why? First, we have an opinion piece by from Quora.com by Camila S. Espinoza, certified Chilean midwife. It's a very specific job and background. She has a little bit called, "Why is disagreeing with a woman's perspective on gender issues an easy way to lose a friendship, but rarely the other way around? As a man, you need to take for granted that any disadvantages and lived experience you have need to be qualified as valid by a woman. The same does not apply to women." From men's perspective. So Camila S. Espinoza writes, oh, you're going to love this. This is great. "Let me tell you a little story. John and Susan are two friends. Susan is on her way to go meet John for ice cream. It's a beautiful and hot summer day, and Susan is getting ready. It's so hot out that a tank top and shorts would definitely help, but then Susan remembers that there's a construction site nearby. And what if John and she end up going to a bar afterward and it gets late? She can't walk home in those shorts anyway, and she won't ask John to accompany her home. He doesn't have a car and lives in the opposite direction. She could get a cab, but she'd have a similar problem. She'd have to pretend to be texting or talking to give the illusion that someone knows that she's in that cab. It's too much work, so she might just change. Maybe a dress? She puts it on and turns in one direction and the other in front of the mirror. Walks a few steps while twisting her neck to check if the hem raises up too much. Yeah, maybe not. A little better than the shorts, but not great. It's getting late and she has to go, so she settles for jeans. She'll wear jeans with this heat, but it's safer. Susan gets out of the house, walks fast and with a purpose. And as she passes next to the construction site, she gets catcalled, loudly. In the next block, a man follows her, gets close, and starts speaking in her ear. By the time she meets John, she is sweaty from all the heat, still a little scared, and mad. Very mad. She shares this experience with John, since John is her friend. She tells him all about how she tried her best to choose an outfit that would prevent this from happening. How this happened anyway because it's not about the clothes or about the woman. This is not a problem women can solve because the problem lies in rape culture and misogyny and how women are perceived by men living in this society. So John says...
I can't anymore. I can't.
I'm
done.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, Can I say something? Can I say something? I'm sorry. The scientist in me is dying. I will slap my big dick of research on this table right now in a huge microaggression. Just like swap, just pull it out and slam it on the table. Because I have a study that shows that when they were interviewing, etc., asking perpetrators of rape in courtrooms over and over, what prompted you to go after this woman? The way she was dressed did not come up once, motherfuckers. That's not what they look for. In fact, a woman who is dressed more modestly will be attacked more because she's perceived as less confident and therefore more of a prey and a victim, for fuck's sake.
Okay. On top of it, I just want to say that if you're actually going to slam your giant dick onto the table, that's a macroaggression.
A dick like that is
that is true.
It would be Richard Rawls, but it would be a gigantoaggression.
I would actually say that yes. I mean, like there are some things like wearing high heels and not knowing how to walk in them, being wobbly, that would make you look like you're vulnerable. But dressing in a provocative manner, it might get you catcalls and stuff like that. But it's not going to target you in terms of an actual rapist thinking that you're a good target, because it expresses confidence, right?
No, in fact, it's over and over and over again. I have to say this: the predatory end of humanity, male or female, is that they're bullies, just at heart, bullies. That is what they do. They go for the weak. The moment you stand up to them, you're not the weak anymore. You stand up by not caring about what they're looking at. You stand up by not caring about what they say. And it's stupid to advise women to continue to live as vulnerable, scared kittens in response to this.
Yeah,
it's like advising people to pay terrorists for kidnapping their family members. Great, you just rewarded them. Guess what they're going to do the next time they need money?
This woman sounds like she has a phobic disorder or something.
Well, it's a giant straw man.
Well, yeah, she's constantly living her life as though she's expecting all the men around her to be like, "Oh, I want to pay attention to that chick. Oh my goodness." And so she's constantly trying to adjust her behavior to this perceived threat that probably is not all that likely to happen, as this article would lead people to believe. Like this kind of reads like a "that happened" kind of thing.
It's not if you don't walk around signaling victimhood everywhere you go. I will give you a real life example of this. Right? It struck me at 13 when I went from a neighborhood that was almost entirely boys and everything was rough and tumble, and it was like play was all about who was stronger and you know who could tough things out, and how much fun it was to test our strength and speed against each other. And you know, I was queen of the monkey bars because I could flip all over the place without touching the ground, and I was better at it than everybody else. And the guys were kings of the football field because they were bigger and stronger, and you know, everybody had their little area that they could do these things in, and it was fun. And then you get into junior high and the relational aggression kicks in. Bam! I was lost. Absolutely lost. No idea what the fuck I was doing. And it showed. It showed in everything I did. It showed every second walking down the hallway that I was vulnerable to this because I'd never encountered it before. I didn't know what to do. And of course that brought out the bullies of both sexes. Anybody that had any tendency at all to engage in relational aggression as their way of testing somebody else's boundaries, testing how far they could push those boundaries and what they could get out of it and so on, I was a huge target. I got nasty nicknames, I got called in the hallway, I got... there was one day when the guys decided it would be funny to play follow the leader without alerting me that I was the leader, you know, and it was all these things that feminists would label sexual harassment. That was really just a bunch of clumsy 13-year-olds, you know, socially clumsy, testing their boundaries and dealing with stuff.
Yeah. That is my life story. Oh my God.
Well, and when I reacted to it, like I've told this one before, the follow the leader thing, I like freaked out over that. And like in hindsight, if I could go back with the person I am today and deal with that, I would have dealt with it in an entirely different manner. Because what they basically were doing was following me and imitating everything I did. Big fat hairy deal, right? And I could have done something that none of them could have done. I was capable at that age of standing in place, lifting one leg up, and putting it over my shoulder, and hopping on one foot, you know, and I couldn't do that now without breaking my neck. But back then, I can guarantee you, not one of those guys would have been able to imitate that. They would have had to stop. But instead, you know, I went in and told the principal. And of course, it was a freak out time for the school administration. They all got in huge trouble, and it was a ridiculous thing. And I learned from that if, you know, you get into a situation like that, for God's sake, don't tell any of the adults, because they will overreact in such a terrible way that it'll completely wreck your ability to build any bridges with the people that you were dealing with. But all of that, when I went through all of that, it took me 20 years to learn the lesson from it that comes out of it. Once I toughened up and started throwing it back, you know, I walk down the hallway and somebody whistles at me, I shake my butt and keep on walking, and instead of you know, ducking my head and hiding behind my books and blushing and looking scared. That is the way you deal with that stuff.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It blows my mind that these women do the opposite, and they want to teach other women to do the opposite, and they want to treat it as though every contact that they make with a person of the opposite sex they didn't initiate it, and they didn't wish really hard for the other person to initiate it, is some sort of an assault. It's not. It's how people build bridges with each other. It's how people test boundaries. And it's how, and in some cases, predators find out if you're easy prey. But in every case, you have the capacity to control that interaction. And one of the most misogynistic, evil things that feminism does to women is tell us that we don't. How dare they take that away from us? How dare they subject us to that? That is victimization right there.
Like in high school, I had almost the exact same sort of thing. I was getting name called from both boys and girls, and initially this really got to me, and I behaved in the same way, kind of like a victim. I would get angry about it, but eventually I started doing self-deprecating humor and making fun of myself as well, you know, just kind of riffing off it and being like, yeah, okay, whatever, this doesn't actually bother me all that much. And all of a sudden, everybody that was against me either became indifferent or even positively disposed. And it's kind of been a way that I've dealt with that sort of name-calling negative comments in the rest of my life. I found it's worked very well for me so far.
Beautiful.
Well, what I found, like, is, you know, the Rape and Incest National Network, oh my God, this dog. The Rape and Incest National Network, several years ago, they put out a statement that they recommend that women who are being sexually assaulted physically and verbally resist. And by verbally resist, that doesn't mean begging, pleading, or crying, or trying to appeal to the rapist's sympathy, right? It means screaming at the top of your fucking lungs, right? And fighting back. And they did this because essentially what they found in their research was that in 80% of cases of attempted rape, when the victim verbally and physically resisted, in 80% of cases, the rape was not completed, right? That there's a level of violence above which, an injury above which the rapist is unwilling to go in most cases, right? And they said essentially that, you know, police agencies and all kinds of people recommend that women don't resist when they're being attacked sexually, because out of fear of being injured. But rape is an injury, and a lot of these same people who are advocating that women don't fight back, right? They say that rape is like on par with death, right? Like it's only death is worse, right? There's nothing I could imagine that's worse than being raped, right? So in asking these women, or discouraging resistance, and essentially recommending that they not resist in order to avoid injury, what they're asking is that these women submit to the greater injury in order to avoid the lesser injury, right? That a sprained wrist or some bruises and scrapes, right? Or a broken nose or a broken arm, right? That you know, like I have literally had feminists say, I can't imagine anything worse than being raped. And I said to this woman, she was a journalist, she was interviewing me for an article. I said, okay, here, imagine this, right? You wake up in your bedroom, right? There's a strange man in your room. He has your 3-year-old daughter in his hands. He's got a gun to her head. And he says, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to kill your daughter, right? What would you do? Right? And there was this big, long pause. right? And then she says, well, I would be thinking of ways of trying to get out of the situation. I'm like, but you'd do it. You'd do it. You know you would. I know you would. Don't lie. We both know you would. And then there was another big long pause, and then she says, okay, yeah, I guess I would. And I was like, congratulations, you thought of something that was worse than being raped, right? But I had to drag that out of her, right? And this same woman would essentially say, getting punched in the face, in order to avoid getting punched in the face by a man, you should just lie there and let him fucking rape you, right? And not resist, not put up any resistance, right? In order to avoid being punched in the face or having your arm twisted, right? And this is what I don't get, like, because the entire fucking rhetoric among these feminists, right? You know, only death is worse, but you should just fucking lie down and take it. You know, and the whole RAIN put out this freaking recommendation, and they said, we understand that we will be accused of victim blaming those women who, for whatever reason, did not resist. Right? But our goal is to reduce the number of victims, not necessarily to make the victims who did not resist feel better about what happened, right? What are we trying to accomplish here? Is it to reduce the number of victims, or is it to make the people who were victimized feel like, you know, like they were completely justified in their inaction, right? And I can't understand how this whole idea of you know, changing the way you dress in ways that have nothing to do with how you're going to be victimized or whether you're going to be victimized, changing the way you interact with people, avoiding situations, all of these things. No, all you have to do is present yourself as a confident person, and that person will pass you over. That sociopath will pass you over in favor of someone who is presenting all of those signals. All of those signals of lack of confidence, you know, probably not going to report it, you know, is too emotionally fragile to report it until like 8 or 10 months later, when all of the evidence has been scrubbed away, all of these things, right? And like, I don't understand how we're not allowed to even fucking broach these topics, and the idea that, yeah, like this fucking woman is living in this fucking rape culture, like.
That's because feminists do not want to deal with the dynamics of human sexuality in this discussion, because it ruins the ability of women to go back after regretting an actual sexual encounter and accuse a guy of rape. It puts agency on the woman. And that's something that they try to avoid. Well, let me finish this. This is something that I've watched this. It's like, this is where the clothing argument comes from. The clothing argument doesn't actually come from that incident where one cop in Canada said something inappropriate. That argument that he made, that wasn't in a vacuum. That was in the context of the argument against what he was saying already existing, and it has existed since like the 50s or 60s, and they've been making that argument not in response to people saying what he said, but in response to a woman's behavior being treated as a relevant thing in the courtroom in rape accusation cases, where a woman has, after a sexual encounter when she was drunk, or after she gets caught with someone who's not her boyfriend or husband, and she has a boyfriend or husband who's going to be jealous, or any other reason where she comes forward and decides that that was rape, and she has to portray the situation as if the guy, you know, jumped her in a dark alley and battered her into submission, when in fact she, at the moment that she started getting ready to go out that night, was preparing to get laid, and she dressed to attract a guy, and she put on makeup to attract a guy, and she went into a bar and she flirted up a storm with the guy, and then she went home with him and had sex with him, and the reason that she didn't say no wasn't because she was frozen, but because she wanted to have sex with the guy. And then she's in the courtroom trying to have all of that not talked about because she wants to accuse him of rape. That's why this stuff exists. It is not because somebody comes out and says, well, women dress a certain way and they're going to get raped. It's not because somebody comes out and says that women were asking for it with their behavior. It's because somebody comes out and says, when a woman goes out and takes step after step after step to get a guy into her bed or to get into a guy's bed and then has sex with him, she has not been raped.
Agreed.
That is what they're arguing against, and that is why they want to get rid of female agency.
Well, what frustrates me too about this whole argument about agency is that when you are being victimized, right, in whatever way, whether it's a sexual assault or just like a physical assault, or or you feel like you're in your divorce, you're being victimized by your ex-spouse, right? Whatever, right? When you feel like you have agency, right, it is so much easier to get over that psychologically. It makes the entire process of psychological recovery easier and shorter, and because you have maintained a sense of your own power throughout the entire process of what happened to you, right? And you were able to say, I gave it my all. I tried everything I could, right? And okay, it wasn't good enough, but I gave it my all. As opposed to, there were all of these things I could have tried, right? And I didn't. And I didn't because I was a coward, or I didn't because I didn't have the personal strength, or I didn't because I didn't have the wherewithal, or I didn't because I just didn't have the strength of character, right? And when you admit that to yourself, right, that you had no power in that situation, even if the power, there is a power imbalance there, right? If you admit to yourself that you had no power whatsoever to stop what happened, or to change what happened, or to ameliorate what happened, or to mitigate what happened, or to minimize what happened, right? to make it less bad, right? If you admit that to yourself, that you are admitting that you have no power. This is and the whole fucking thing that these feminists are pushing is to get women to feel like they have no fucking power, and it doesn't help any of these women, because it is the women and individuals, whether you were victimized in a plane crash or a car accident or a fucking, you were mugged or whatever. It is the people who did everything right, and who it was random chance. You were struck by lightning, sitting on your sofa in your living room on a clear day, right? It is those people who end up holding themselves up in their apartment for the next 20 years and never sticking their face out. Because if there's nothing you could think of that you could have done to prevent what happened, right, then there is nothing you can ever do to prevent it happening again, right? And I have always said that the entire question of victim blaming, the very first person who blames the victim is the victim herself or himself, right? They are the ones, because they are psychologically programmed, they are evolutionarily programmed to identify the things that they did, the decisions that they had power over, right, that contributed to them being put in a position where they were vulnerable to something like that happening to them, right? And their brain will force them to look at every single fucking thing they did that day, even if it's like, I took 50th Street instead of 75th Street, and that's why I got T-boned by that fucking drunk driver, right? They will fucking examine minutely every single fucking decision they made leading up to what happened, and particularly if it was really traumatizing to them, if it was like a really, really severe incident, they got T-boned by a fucking drunk driver and their kid died or something like that, right? They will look at every fucking decision that they made. Did I check both ways after the light turned green, right? Was I being a defensive driver? All of those things, right? Because their brain is trying to force them to learn a lesson from it so that it doesn't ever happen to them again, right? That is a survival mechanism. That is healthy psychology. And we have feminist advocates and therapists saying to these women, you should not do that. There was nothing you could have done.
Well, it's not only extremely harmful for women to think that way and to become as paranoid as you said, but it's also harmful for like the guys involved in this situation, because if a woman is like all of her agency is removed from her and she can't be expected to be responsible for any of her behaviors, then how can he trust that he's not going to do the exact wrong thing that might change it from okay to bad in her mind, and then all of a sudden the whole scenario becomes bad in retrospect? And basically, if these women have no agency, or if they can do take backsies whenever they want to, then how can he be expected to basically be able to do anything about it, really? Like, should these women just be constantly supervised by somebody else? Like this, I don't actually know.
Well, that's how they did it in the Victorian era.
I know.
Actually, chaperone. Everybody had to have chaperones.
Exactly. It feels like these guys are wanting to go back to that time, because I see no other logical conclusion that they plan to take this to.
This is, I once said to somebody on Twitter, and he's like, oh, I'm going to rip this apart. And I don't know if he actually made a video on it or not, but I said, if you mix feminism in cultures that are backwards now, that have, you know, oppressive systems now, if you mix feminism with those systems, they won't solve anything. They will increase everything that they purport to oppose. And that right there, the Victorian chaperone thing, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And Karen, what you were describing is my experience. And in the 7th grade, at the peak of that sort of conflict, that cognitive dissonance between trying to diffuse a sense of abject helplessness and trying not to feel like something horrible that was done to me over and over again was my fault, I almost committed suicide. I actually had everything ready. I was prepared. I was going to do it in the bathroom. I had it all set up. I had the bottle in my hand. I took the pills and everything.
Well, you felt helpless. You felt like
and then and then I realized my parents were going to come in and find my dead body with shit and piss all over it, because I would lose everything, you know, when I died. And when you're used to fighting nausea from other causes in your life, making yourself throwing up is very painful. But it worked, and I survived, obviously, because I'm here. This is the thing that feminists subject women to, both whether they've been victimized or whether they have not. And when you subject somebody who has been victimized to it, you're not helping them. The idea of victim blaming and the feminist victim blaming narrative is not just, it's not just bad for society at large. It's not just bad for women and girls and men and boys who need a way to avoid being victimized, to fight back against that. It's bad for people who need to recover from something that they had no control over. And that was a situation where once I realized I can't escape this way without hurting people that I can't accept hurting, I have to find a way out of this. And my solution was probably not the most constructive solution. I beat the shit out of my attacker instead of going to adults, because at that age I really couldn't find a rational way to explain to the adults that I was being assaulted by another girl.
That was probably the more constructive solution, actually, Hannah.
It probably was to a degree, but I mean, this is somebody that probably should have had help, and there's nothing that I can do about it now because there's no way I can go back and prove what happened. I don't even have contact with the individual. But yeah, no, it just, that experience taught me a whole lot about agency right there. That it was in my hands. And you try to rationalize everything. You try to rationalize, what could I have done? I wasn't supposed to be at her house when there weren't any other adults over there, so it was my fault. This is such a bizarre thing, and it's so surreal, it can't possibly really be happening. I must have just had a bad nightmare. And obviously I fell out of bed, and that's where the bruises came from, you know. And it was just one thing after another. Well, it's been weeks and weeks. I must have imagined it, and I should stop dwelling on it. And then it happens again. Well, you can't, I don't know, you can't allow somebody to maintain a helpless attitude, I can't do anything about this attitude, and expect them to survive. It doesn't work. You have to be able to have your agency. The most valuable thing that you have in your life, besides being alive, is your personal agency, your ability to take control of what happens to you in your life. And that's why I keep saying it's the most misogynistic thing that feminists do, taking women's agency away. You take everything away from a person when you make them helpless. Everything.
Yeah. No, and on top of that, I mean, like, when you look at a sexual assault, like, because in the same breath, they're saying sexual assault, only death is worse, right? It is that horrific, right? And it will destroy you for life, and you will never get over it, and it will be a mark on your soul forever.
You know what? I had a chance to make that decision too once. Death is not worse, or
no.
Death is far worse than being sexually assaulted.
You know, and then
sorry,
on top of that. Then on top of that, right, in the same breath, they say, well, but you shouldn't do anything to, prevent yourself from being sexually assaulted, right? I mean, there's this horrific thing. And I mean, like, this was exemplified in Clementine Ford's TEDx talk, My Vagina is Not a Car. Okay, so what you're saying, Clementine, is your vagina doesn't belong to you. You don't have ownership of it. And you don't have a right to dictate what will or will not happen to it and who does or does not ride in it. That is essentially what you're saying when you say my vagina is not a car. Because she's saying, these sort of theft prevention, car theft prevention, people getting alarm systems, people locking their doors, all of those things, right? That none of that, right, those analogies can apply to rape or sexual assault because my vagina is not a car, right? And I am blown away by this. It's like, my vagina is not my responsibility to protect. My vagina it is not my responsibility. It is my right to dictate, but it is not my responsibility to enact that in the world, right? As far as who gets to touch it and in what way, right? It is my right to dictate it, but it is not my responsibility to enact that in the world.
Right. I just wanted to add one really quick thing.
Okay, this is the last thing. Then we got to move on.
The last thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Just, you guys are talking about, like, legitimate sexual assault cases, but the one that really bothers me is when they talk about this with cases of regret. Like, I've had cases where I did something and I regretted it, and a lot of people these days would try to push that as, oh, well, I mean, you were sexually assaulted. Basically what it was we were just doing something. I didn't feel prepared to do it, but I went ahead with it anyway, and afterwards I felt bad. But that was still my choice to do that. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a lack of agency. That was my choice. So it really pisses me off when they try and turn that into something that I couldn't have controlled or that was done to me when it was something that I actively did.
You know, I have to say a point on that. It kind of, as much as I can say negatively, and I want to one day, about, you know, Trump and his administration, etc. I will have to say that some of the shit about grabbing by the pussy and all the ideology or the conversation around women who are, and like the whole Bill Cosby thing even, like just the whole conversation around women who are in media, who are in the celebrity sort of eye, they're trying to get famous. There's an element of exchanging a certain element of like boundary, a personal, you give something up by allowing Trump to grab you by the pussy. But at the same time, or taking Quaaludes with Bill Cosby, but at the same time, you know that it's going to forward your career. It is going to help you to be in with those people. And so you willingly sacrifice that discomfort in order to get something else. And it is a rare woman that actually fucking admits that that's what they do. And it pisses me the hell off when they act like, you know, they want to literally keep their cake and eat it too. You can't. You fucking can't. It's one or the other. You are making a choice. You are making a sacrifice. Yeah, it's sacrifice, but you're motherfucking making it.
Maybe
So,
they might.
own
They
up
might
to it.
genuinely want it, and then just later they decide, well, you know, it wasn't all that great, or somebody
Oh yeah, but I'm
talks them
talking
into.
specifically in
Like
in the setting of being predated upon by a
Right.
boss or by anyone sort of in a higher up position because you seek to gain from it.
Yeah, sure. In the cases where that is legitimately happening, I guess in the example of what you were talking about with Bill Cosby and Donald Trump, we can't ever know for sure that these women didn't really want it, and they just kind of, you know, made took one for the team, and
we know for sure in at least one case that it was a false accusation.
Yeah. So, but that does not invalidate your point. I'm just, for the people who are watching that may not know a lot about, you know, the lots of conversations we had about, you know, grabbing by the pussy, and also the Bill Cosby trial, which is ongoing. They're just, the evidence just isn't there. There are just a lot of accusations, and
Well,
I think it's
what's
important to note the difference between those things.
What's frustrating about this is, you know, like, and anybody who's listening to this who hasn't seen my videos on the topic, I would suggest you go and watch my 2 videos called The Quandary of Consent, Part 1 and 2, right? Because women will recontextualize consensual sexual encounters and turn them into essentially rape. Right? They will feel victimized by them, even if they were the ones who were the sexual initiator, depending on what they had in mind when going in, right? So if they think, oh, well, I'm going to initiate this sexual encounter with Justin Bieber, right? And then he's going to ask me to marry him and blah, 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 right? And I'm going to be his girl, okay? And she bangs him and then, you know, climbs him like a fucking fire pole and bangs him, and he never texts her again and ignores all of her overtures, right? Women seem to be, and I'm judging this, okay, and then going back the other way and having a woman who is actually raped by every fucking legal definition of the word, right? It would absolutely, it was not consensual when it happened, right? But then when they woke up the next morning from being, you know, having sex with somebody when they were blackout or passed out drunk, right? They were happy with the fact that, you know, the captain of the football team wants to date them now, right? Or whatever, right? And so they're happy with the results. So then they recontextualize it as not rape. And how do you, and I am basing this not on cases of this happening that come out in court. I'm basing this on a content analysis of the most consumed form of fiction on the planet, right? Not just the most consumed by women, the most consumed form of fiction, period, right? It outcompetes everything. It outcompetes science fiction, it outcompetes fucking fantasy fiction, it outcompetes reality fiction, it outcompetes fucking crime fiction, it outcompetes suspense and thrillers and fucking, you know, frickin' Bones and her frickin' anthropology, anthropological forensics, and all of those things, right? Okay? It beats all of that out. It beats out Dexter. It beats out everything, right? It is the biggest selling genre, outcompeting not just every other genre, right? But all other genres combined. It is more than 50% of the market. It is almost exclusively written by women, and it is almost exclusively consumed by women, and it is full of this shit. Absolutely fucking full of this shit. Right? Because it appeals to women's psychology around sex. Right?
Yep.
If he raped me, but then he spends the next 180 pages proving to me that if I had known him then, the way I know him now, I would have consented, then, yeah, I consented. Right? Or, yeah, I essentially forced him to have sex with me. I guilted him into it. I shamed him into it. I told him, I'm a widow and I haven't known the touch of a man for years. And here you are denying me this. How dare you? How horrible, how cruel. And then he leaves town the next day. Yeah, now I was raped.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's get us through the rest because there's 2 other stories that I got to do.
I guess all I'm saying is women are fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's why I won't have a fucking relationship with one. Thank you.
Okay, so going back to this Quora.com piece. So just to clarify, for those of you who forget where we were, Camila S. Espinosa was telling a harrowing, terrible story about how much trouble she goes through just to meet with her friend John for some ice cream, with all the catcalling and the clothes obsessing and everything. So she finally gets to John, and she tells him the story. And John says, quote, "You're overreacting. This has nothing to do with rape culture. But look, if it really bothers you, then consider it a compliment. I mean, if it was me and women were shouting that I look good, I'd be flattered." And that's when Susan sees it. This is not just something he said. John, her dear friend, is just not capable of empathy. He's undermining her experience even though he can't possibly know what it feels like to walk in her shoes, and he's also undermining her gender. Susan realizes right there that if he could do this to her, a friend he cares about dearly, how does he treat other women? Women...
Okay. Where's her fucking empathy? Because you know what? He's saying, if I had women telling me I'm gorgeous, right? You know, if I was like Tom Jones and I could, you know, and I had women throwing their fucking panties at me, right? While I was on stage, I would be like, that would be like the most fucking amazing thing. Does she have any empathy towards how men are starved for
affection?
Any women? Well, any women actually overtly expressing sexual interest in them, right? Not affection. I mean, like, once a guy gets with a woman, often, you know, there's some affection there. But starved as a single guy, walking down the street, he's fucking invisible. He's invisible to women. 90% of guys, completely invisible. Nobody's going to catcall him. Nobody's going to say, you look great today. Nobody's going to say, oh, fuck, your teeth look so white. Nobody's going to say nothing. You know, oh, those are great shoes. Nothing. Not going to fucking say anything complimentary to them whatsoever, right? This is the reality that men live with every day. So you literally have a grass is greener thing, and all she's doing is saying, he can't see that his grass is greener than mine, right? When she is completely incapable of seeing that her grass is greener in some ways than his.
Yeah.
And feminists have a bad habit also of conflating perception and belief with experience when they talk about experience. Like, there's been times where I have had like moving violations with my vehicle, where I've run a red light or I've run a stop sign or whatever, and I've in my experience, I thought I did the right thing. I thought I paused long enough. I thought at the stop sign, I thought I made it through the intersection before the light turned red and everything. Find out later, no, I didn't. Well, that's my experience. If you tell me it didn't happen that way, you're not invalidating my experience. You're invalidating my perception. And it's not the same thing. Your experience is that you went through the intersection. Your perception is that the light didn't change. Your experience is that you were walking down the street and somebody yelled at you. Your perception is that it was predatory or malicious or malevolent. Sorry, but you don't get to impose your perception on other people's experience either. And Susan thinking that her friend has no capacity for empathy because he doesn't buy into her perception, like she's imposing imputations of malice and imputations of predatory natures on everybody around her. Intent, yeah, predatory intent on everybody around her without any evidence. Mm-hmm. So, John's right. She is overreacting, and it doesn't have anything to do with rape culture. And frankly, catcalling, there's a number of different reasons it happens, and one of them is because the guy wants to get a rise out of you. Doesn't mean he's going to follow you home and rape you, and it doesn't mean that he would approve if somebody did. Like most of the guys that I've actually known that have catcalled me, if I told them ways in which I was victimized by other guys, they would have tracked those guys down and beaten the ever-loving shit out of them for it. Even though they might yell, "Woo, sexy legs" at me when I'm walking down the hallway, they still would not have tolerated somebody forcing himself on me because I'm a girl. And that is something that feminists don't accept or acknowledge. So this idea that their perception is somehow the reality, and that their experience is invalidated if you don't agree with the way they are perceiving or believing about their experiences, that somehow facilitates rape culture. It's absolute bullshit.
Yep.
I have to also say, if you want to, oh, dog, shush. There, we've got thunder going on, so my dog is getting all worked up. But when you look at what borderline personalities and histrionic personalities do, is they impute intention where it doesn't exist, right? That is one of the key elements of borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder, is the attribution of intention where it does not exist. And so I just, when I look at how the entire diagnostic inventory for borderline personality disorder dovetails perfectly with feminist theory, right? And I compare the two, and I am forced to say, I don't think that these particular women are reliable narrators. Mm-hmm. At all.
All right. Let me get through the rest of this. We're almost at the end. So she says, Susan realizes right there that if he could do this to her, a friend he cares about dearly, how does he treat other women? Women that he met at the bar, for example. Women he has no emotional attachment to. Has he catcalled other women? Has he made other women feel like she felt while walking on the street? This is not about your feelings or the validity of your experience as a human being. Discussions about gender equality help you see people in a different light and determine whether or not the person in front of you is someone you want to associate with. P.S. This is a real story, according to Camila Espinoza. And the whole bus clapped. But I just want to point out, though, the reason why I want to read this is also this is an answer posted on a website called Quora.com, which is a question and answer site where people like post questions, and then the community answers, and it gets voted, and then like the top answer goes at the top. This is actually the top answer to this question. Why is disagreeing with a woman's perspective on gender issues an easy way to lose a friendship, but rarely the other way around? This answer and this story is the top answer.
So the short version is because women do not have the capacity to accept that perspectives other than their own exist and could be valid.
So it would seem, although
Yeah.
I find it really interesting because I think before the show started, I was talking about this story, and you guys said my experience is the opposite, and I was going to say mine is too. Essentially, if you don't toe the line when it comes to feminist belief, you will be socially ostracized instantly. And it's not just feminist belief, it's just social justice warrior dogma in general. You have to toe the line on that if you want to keep a friendship sometimes. It's fucked up, but it happens. And this is usually the way it goes. So I find the question itself a bit strange. Because this is usually the way things go. So
Yeah, I actually, like, people don't stop talking to me in general because I've disagreed with women on gender issues, but people do stop talking to me because I disagree with feminism. And I've had guys stop talking to me because I disagree with feminism. Feminist guys will completely reverse the listen to women narrative the moment a woman disagrees with feminism. So this idea that it's a gender thing is bullshit.
yeah.
You know, I was thinking about this. She says, if he could do this to her, a friend he cares about dearly, well, what about her? If she could impose this, impute malice on him, impute basically the inability to empathize on him for the crime of having a perception of events that is different from her perception of events, of coming to a different conclusion than she comes to. If she could do that to him, a person that she purports to care about dearly, because obviously she put a lot of consideration into what it would take in her minefield, her mental minefield of fantasy about the rest of the world, to go, it must be so exhausting to go out with this guy, because she has to go through all this other stuff to go out with this guy, and she still did it. Clearly, she cares about him, right? And yet, she can turn around and just because he didn't agree with her conclusions about what she said, all of a sudden, he has no capacity for empathy? What's she doing to strangers? If she can impute that kind of intent or lack of intent on him, if she can impose on him the idea that he's this unsympathetic monster, what is she doing to the men around her that are not her buddies? What must it be like to have a job in a place where this woman works? What must it be like to be the male clerk or cashier at an establishment this woman shops at or otherwise patronizes? Dear God, I'd hate to be in her sphere of existence.
Yeah, it's like walking on eggshell.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next story now. This one is kind of interesting. Flying the far too friendly skies. One woman who molested female on Alaska Airlines plane sentenced. What was supposed to have been a routine flight from Las Vegas to Portland ended up being a disturbing ordeal for a 19-year-old Oregon teen. The teenager, whose name has not been made public, was repeatedly advanced upon by a fellow passenger seated next to her. The fellow passenger first began taking photos of the 19-year-old before attempting to ply her with alcohol, which was illegally smuggled aboard the flight. Despite her repeated protests, the passenger only seemed to grow bolder. The victim soon found herself being groped, licked, and eventually mounted with the intention of having sex by the perpetrator. Finally, having had enough, the 19-year-old pushed her abuser off and alerted the flight crew as her abuser hurled insults and curses at her. If you believe that, you can guess the gender of the perpetrator in this story by that description. You may be in for a shock, as the 19-year-old abuser was female. Heidi McKinney, age 27 and also native to Oregon, found herself in court for her antics aboard an Alaskan Airlines flight in May of 2016. As part of the plea agreement, the charge of abusive sexual conduct was dropped down to assault with intent to commit a felony. The victim, still too shaken and emotional to read her own impact statement, opted to have her grandmother read it instead. She wrote, quote, I personally don't feel you know how much damage you have caused me. And that day you messed with my head and took something from me that I will never get back. The victim also wrote that she blamed herself for being too friendly towards McKinney initially, and that she forgives her if only to help herself move on, and hopes that McKinney gets the help that she needs. On June 19th, McKinney, who had previously been arrested in 2008 and 2015 for drunk driving, was sentenced to 8 months of home detention, 3 years of probation, and to pay the victim $3,000 restitution.
Okay, so basically this woman got a pussy pass for essentially doing some really fucked up shit to a young woman sitting next to her on a plane. And that, that's, you know, actually Hannah and Allison and I in the board meeting today, earlier, we were talking about the NISVS, the CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, and the reasons why they have done their definitions and the reasons why they have chosen to disclose some of their data and not other parts of their data that they have collected. And Hannah and I seem to both be in agreement that it's not about concealing male victims. It's about concealing female perpetrators.
Yeah, that's the point that I had my name in the chat to make here, actually. Heidi McKinney, how lucky she is. She is so lucky that she's a woman in a world that doesn't view women's violence as violence in the same vein as men's violence is viewed as violence. She's lucky she's a woman in a world where girls don't grow up like boys do, responsible for their own safety, having to learn to defend themselves against a violent assault, and living their lives prepared to defend themselves at a moment's notice the moment they become victims of a violent assault. She's lucky she didn't assault a gal who learned to respond to being assaulted by handing out a massive beatdown. Because if she had, a 19-year-old could have kicked her ass really hard, and a judge would have thrown the book at her for it without even taking that into consideration. She's lucky that rather than being worried about forgiving herself, her victim's worried about forgiving herself. Because if she were a dude, she'd be worried about not getting her ass kicked in jail or prison by fellow prisoners after they learn that she's in there for sexual assault. She'd be worrying about how to pay her bills with a sex crime conviction on her record, keeping her from being able to get jobs in many, many areas. How to find a place to live with her name on a sex offender list. How to move on after serving her time when her sentence doesn't end with her term of imprisonment but continues on for years with probationary measures, limiting where she can go and what she can do, and requiring her to avail herself to expensive state-sponsored therapy that demonizes her as part of the therapy. She's lucky as fuck. She ought to thank her lucky stars that she perpetrated that assault packing a vag and not a dick. Because if she were a dude, it wouldn't matter if she could get help. She'd have to deal with the fact that society would never again view her as anything but a sexual assailant for the rest of her life.
Yeah. No, and as well, you know, the whole thing with because we did just have some media reports in mainstream media essentially saying, you know, like, women are sexual predators more often than you think. Like, women commit rape more often than we think, and but we just don't hold them accountable for it. And what I find the most offensive about this is that it is another thing that feminists are doing to conceal women's agency, or to obfuscate it, or to pretend that it doesn't exist, to conceal women's power, right? That women have power, right? And you know, honestly, any feminist would say that the ability of a good-looking, well-dressed, upper-middle-class, educated white man to be able to you know, charm a jury, right, and charm his way out of a conviction, right, they would say that that's power. They would say that that's power, to be seen as harmless. They would say that that is a form of social power and social privilege, right? But they will not fucking address the fact that women can do this when they're drug addicts, when they're not well dressed and rich, when they're not fucking, you know, privileged, you know, financially or white, right? That women, compared to men, are able to do this, right? To charm a fucking jury or fool a jury into believing that it wasn't their fault. That is not fucking power. It's power in the hands of a middle class or upper middle class educated white man, right? But it's not power when it's being exercised by a woman.
Yep.
And the whole thing, the whole fucking thing with the CDC, it's not about concealing male victims, because they are super happy, and Hannah said this earlier today, and I will reiterate this because this is a point I have made as well in the past. They are not interested in concealing male victims when those male victims are victims of other males. What they are interested in is concealing male perpetrators, which leaves a lot of bisexual women at risk. It leaves a lot of lesbian women at risk. It leaves them without recourse, without redress under the law, without help and assistance, right? It leaves them twisting in the fucking wind, right? Mm-hmm. And feminism is willing to cut those marginalized women, lesbian women, right? Trans women, trans men, right? Bisexual women, willing to cut them all fucking loose as if their perpetrator is a woman.
Yeah, their whole game really is demonizing men as perpetrators. And it's, I mean, if you wanted to persuade society to accept infringements on due process rights, the only way you could achieve it is by, for the women, because men are bad. And you have to have because men are bad as part of that. And you cannot portray women as the ultimate victims if women can also be perpetrators. So the bad people are not all men. You can't get things through like they've gotten through in the areas of sexual violence and intimate partner violence if you have both sexes being considered perpetrators. And you have to admit that it is a dysfunctional minority of society across various groups that have in common the fact that for whatever reason in their lives, they learn to deal with a conflict between what they want and what they can get violently. That's where sexual violence comes from. That's where intimate partner violence comes from. That's where violence towards people who are not your intimate partner comes from. And they can't deal with that, because if they deal with that, they can't use it to attack due process rights. You would never be able to use the arguments that they use to chip away at due process in intimate partner and sexual violence law, to say chip away at due process in tax law. You'd never be able to say, well, you know, we should not include this exculpatory evidence because it would be embarrassing to the accuser for the judge to find out that this guy has already paid his taxes once and doesn't actually owe them anymore. You know, the IRS shouldn't have to admit that because it's embarrassing, so that's exculpatory evidence that can't be included in the case. You wouldn't be able to get that through, but you could get that through in a sexual violence area where you say, well, yeah, she was an active participant in this sex act, but you can't say that because that would embarrass her, so you can't include that evidence or any evidence that shows it because that's the victim's sexual history. You know, how crazy is that? And the only way they can get it through is by not admitting female agency, not admitting women can be perpetrators, and generalizing the act of perpetration to all men. That's it.
That this might sound like a silly little aside, but just looking at her mugshot here, and I've seen this in a lot of mugshots of female, like, sexual assaulters, like women who have slept with their students and stuff like that. They all seem to have this little smirk on their face, like they don't even think that they've done something bad. Like, oh, I'm bad, in that kind of way, but not in a I've actually done something wrong kind of thing.
It's like the cat that ate the canary.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, that could just be because I don't know. It could just be the way her face is, but I've noticed the same what you're talking about. I've seen that a lot too. Yeah, she also happens to be kind of attractive, and I wonder if that also may have played a role in her getting a lighter sentence, because I think that there is such a thing as attractiveness privilege. But anyway, I guess if there's nothing else, we're going to move on to the last story. This is the big one. Betsy DeVos to meet with men's rights activists and victims of false accusations.
That fucking whore. That fucking whore. How dare she? How dare she consult with the National Coalition for Men, families advocating campus equality, and stop abusive and violent environments. How dare she consult with these groups that help both men and women when necessary, and are advocating for due process.
That sounds radical as fuck. But let me get into the. I'm going to get into the write-up because it's kind of long, and Andrew did a lot of work on this, so I want to read it for him. Today at 1 p.m., Betsy DeVos met with two men who alleged that they were falsely accused of rape and railroaded by their universities, as well as members of Stop Abusive Violent Environment, or SAVE, the National Coalition for Men, NCFM, and families advocating for campus equality, FACE. She also met with various survivors of sexual assault, as well as some higher education officials and sexual assault experts. Some women's rights advocates are concerned specifically about the meeting with the men's rights activists and the dialogue surrounding sexual assault victims. Laura Dunn, founder of Serve Justice, claims in a statement to The Independent that, quote, "There is a difference between due process advocates and men's rights groups that are often rape denialists that promote the sexist rape myth that most women lie. While it is appropriate to discuss and improve due process protections on campus, this should not come at the expense of survivors' rights, nor be couched in a mentality that victims are lying about their experiences," end quote. Many victim advocate organizations and news outlets continue to push the many times debunked 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 sexual assault statistic, and continue to use shoddy research when examining the issue of sexual assault and domestic violence on college campuses. Needless to say, these same entities are not pleased that men's rights activists are getting a chance to speak to the Secretary of Education. At a press conference later in the afternoon, Betsy DeVos shared her thoughts on the, quote, emotionally draining day she had with the various listening sessions. DeVos is very willing to meet with all sides regarding these issues. Regarding the Dear Colleague letter of 2011, DeVos has not taken a stance one way or another regarding the Department of Education rescinding those guidelines. However, it seems that DeVos is encouraging legislators to address these issues. She said, quote, "There has been a lack of clarity in this area, and I think it's time for Congress to address this. It's Congress's role to make laws, and so I think it's high time for Congress to look at the law that was passed in 1972 and address these issues and finally speak to them and clarify them," end quote. So while Betsy DeVos has not taken a stance on rescinding the extremely controversial Dear Colleague letter of 2011, her willingness to meet with people critical of how colleges have conducted Title IX investigations gives some hope to men on college campuses who are wrongly accused of sexual assault. Greater due process protections would be most welcome, whether it be the Department of Education, Congress, or even individual state governments. Change is coming. All right, Prim, I think you were the first one in, but I'm not sure. Or it was Hannah. How long ago did I start?
It's Hannah. That was for the last one.
Okay, okay. Well, in that case, all right. Notice, how opponents of the men's rights movement have to strawman the argument that women can and do lie about sexual assault, and when they do, it's damaging to their targets by inserting the word most into the argument, where we have not made our argument ever that most women lie about sexual assault. Just that it happens, that when it does happen, it's damaging, and that it is a significant problem. It's significant even if it were as rare as feminists say it is. And the reason that they say it's rare, and the reason that they're putting most into this argument to strawman it, is that for years they responded to it being pointed out that it is damaging when it happens, it's life-wrecking when it happens, by claiming that it wasn't an important issue on the basis of rarity, an assertion they have never been able to back with anything more than a claim Susan Brown Miller made. And her claim wasn't based on statistics, it was based on the opinion of one cop. So here we have a group who is claiming that if a terrible thing is rare, it's okay to sacrifice those few men they think it's happening to for the benefit of the many women that they think are being sexually abused by so many men. And even when it turns out that it's not as rare as they claim, even in pointing out that there are instances where the FBI, for instance, has found when they check DNA or when they check other evidence, that approximately 1 in 4 cases where it's contested, the guy that is accused is at the very least not the guy who committed the crime, if the crime was committed. They've got the wrong guy in 1 in 4 of those cases. So there's at least a 25% chance in some instances that the person being accused is innocent. There's been other researchers that actually have shown a majority. And there's questions about, all of the various studies and all of the various instances of research. But what that tells us is that the number could be, at the lowest, 8%, and it could be as high as 65%. And depending on the society, sometimes it's proved that it is. For instance, in India, they do have a 65 to 85% false accusation rate in their legal system for rape cases. So in this idea that our main argument is that most women lie is not true. And at the same time, it is significant that some women do.
Okay, I wanna say, even if we said most women lie about rape, right? Most women do lie about rape because there is such a thing as a lie of omission. So, and what feminists are arguing is that the vast majority of rapes go unreported, right? So those are lies by omission. Okay, but there was a study that was done. I think they chose 8 police agencies. There were a significant number of police agencies that applied to participate in this study, and 8 were chosen. And part of the conditions of them participating in this study was that they would undergo, the investigating officers would undergo a 3-day training conference, right, a seminar on how to appropriately investigate rape complaints. And this was all written up in a blog post, in a series of blog posts. You could Google how to lie using rape statistics. But what the situation they're setting up, a rape report can only be classified as false after a thorough fact-based investigation. Even a confession that the rape report was false is not enough to classify it as false. Investigators are not to ask the same question twice, because then the complainant may change their story. They may give two different answers. Even if you find key parts of their story to be false, don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. Just ignore it, because it's normal, right? That complainants fabricate portions of their claim, right? Challenging the validity of their report could be potentially devastating to a complainant who is a real victim, right? And even if you think the report is false, it's not really worth your time to prove that it is, okay? So these are the conditions in which this group of 8 police agencies, they were trained to internalize these conditions, right? So you can only determine a report false if you can definitively prove it is, but don't ask the complainant the same question twice, because you might get a different answer, right? Don't pay much attention to false claims within their overall claim. Don't challenge the validity of their report, because that could traumatize them. And even if you think it's false, it's a false report, it's not worth the time and effort and the police resources to investigate and prove that it is, because there's not going to be a prosecution in that vein anyway, okay? And they found that 7% of rape reports were deemed false under these criteria. Under these fucking criteria. And the feminists are presenting this as low, right? So literally you have a situation where evidence that it is 100% demonstrably false could prove it in court in 2 hours. The jury would take 10 minutes to deliberate, okay? That type of false report, the evidence of that had to fall in investigators' laps without them looking for it in order to determine that it was false, right? And they found 7% of their reports were false.
And feminists' response to that,
and they pretend that that's low. They pretend
Yeah.
that that's low. And I'm sorry, but 6% of reports, about 6% of reports, shush dog, about 6% of reports play out in court, result in convictions. Some of those are false. Oh my God, dog, shut up. Some of those convictions are going to be false convictions, but about 6% of reports are proven in a court of law, right? And they want us to throw every other accusation back into the big bucket of rapes that actually happened. I'm sorry. That's not reasonable. Dog, I'm gonna fucking kill you.
Feminist response to that the thing that you described, the procedure that you described, seems to have been demanding that it be instituted as the way the cops handle a rape report, because I've seen detectives do exactly what you described in an actual case of false accusation. The 7 years in hell case that I keep referring to, the one of the accusations that the malicious prosecuting, vexatious litigating ex-wife made was rape. And she went in and made the accusation. She named a day, a time, and a place. And the guy was in a different location on camera at that day and time. So it was proved that he didn't do it. And of course there was no medical kit because the rape didn't happen. So she hadn't actually been checked to see if she was raped, because she wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, and the result was they brought her back in to talk about it. She changed her story dramatically. Yeah. They brought him back in for questioning. He happened to also have proof of where and what he was doing then too. Documented proof. Because by that time we were documenting everything he did. And it went on so long that we started asking him questions like, could she have, saved some of your sperm in a little bag or something that she's got some, fake evidence that she's using? And he's going, no, there's no way that this could be anything but this detective going after him because it's been instituted in policy. That's actually what got me started researching the Violence Against Women Act, when I started learning that they instituted policy where these law enforcement officers and even court personnel are trained in the Duluth model of domestic violence, and they are trained to use the same reasoning with respect to sexual violence.
Yes.
And they're trained to use the believe the woman standard. They have under the law, they have no option for recognizing that an accusation is blatantly and obviously false. And his attorney actually had to go to the prosecuting attorney and threaten the state with an embarrassing lawsuit in order to get them to stop dragging him into the police station every week on a story change from an accusation that by that time, there's no way it would have held up in court. A jury would never have found that guy guilty because it was blatantly obvious, and it was going to be blatantly obvious based on the story changes alone. It was blatantly obvious that she bald-faced lied about this. Yeah, and that's what men are subjected to now.
Oh, no, and like this is all exemplified by the Jian Ghomeshi case in Canada, right? Where you literally have Toronto Police Services. They have an engineered incompetence in terms of this, because and so everybody's mad at the prosecutor, right? Everybody's angry at the prosecutor for not prepping, their quote unquote clients well enough, even though the complainant is not the client of the prosecutor, the people are. But and the complainant's lawyers not, letting them know, enough about the law and all of this. Like all these women had to do was tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in all of their sworn statements and in their sworn testimony. That's all they had to fucking do. They lied and 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 lied. Right? And everybody is acting as if Ghomeshi got away with it on a fucking technicality, right? No, he didn't get away with it. He didn't get away with anything. He didn't fucking do anything. I'm sorry. I'm actually willing to come out and say now, right? And I don't know 100%, because the only people who know what happened are these women and that man, right? But I am willing to come out on the record and say, I think he was falsely accused by all three women. I think he was an innocent man who was railroaded, right? And I think that the entire fact that it made it into a fucking courtroom, right, based on the investigative practices of Toronto Police Services, right, which is essentially listen and believe, don't ask any more questions, right? Don't look into anything, right? If they say, and I watched a fucking video of Toronto Police Services asking Lucy Ducoutre, who was the primary complainant in this case, the orchestrator of the entire fucking thing, right? They asked her, well, is there any communication that you might have had with him after the assault, blah, blah, blah. And she said, yeah, but I don't have access to that account because it's an old account and I can't get in. I lost my password. And they left it at that. They left it. They were just like, okay, we're not going to, like, they literally thought to themselves, there is potentially exculpatory evidence out there, but we're not going to try to uncover it ourselves. Right? So we're going to go in full bore, 100% what she says. She says she didn't fucking talk to him afterwards. She avoided all contact with him afterwards, blah, blah, blah. And then Marie Hennen, the cat who ate the fucking canary, sitting at her desk in the courtroom, watching these witnesses testify to all of this shit, right? That the police didn't fucking even look into. Right? And she's sitting there with the evidence that they're lying in folders on her fucking desk. right? And I'm just blown away at how now we have Bill C-51 in Canada, which everybody is swearing is not, it hasn't been proposed because of the fact that Jian Ghomeshi got off, right? No, it has nothing to do with Jian Ghomeshi. But if Bill C-51 passes, every single bit of exculpatory evidence that he introduced in that trial would have been excluded. But, oh, yeah, no, it has nothing to do with that. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is what is going on in Canada. We just had Ronna Ambrose, a conservative fucking leader, the leader of the fucking Conservative Party, right? Fast track, without readings, without debate, right? We're just going straight to a vote. It's a fast track bill, right? To subject judges in Canada, prospective judges in Canada, to feminist training on sexual assault myths. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just had that go through with no debate in Parliament. None. Okay, by our Conservative fucking party. Okay, and then she announces, okay, now my work's done and I'm going to get out of politics. Yeah, fuck you, bitch. Right?
And that's coming directly from this.
Now that you've fucked everything up, right? Now you're going to leave politics because you've done your damage and now you're going to go, right, and retire. And now we have this C-51, which will essentially, you know, like right now in Canada, a woman's medical history and other aspects of her sexual history that she could argue are private, right? So if she's a big old slut, right, that cannot be considered admissible unless she was, you know. But now it's emails, it's text messages, it's fucking, you know, anything before or after the assault, right? And here's the thing, right? All of these people who are defending this bill say, well, it doesn't actually exclude the things that are pertinent to the case. Okay, so it doesn't actually, you can actually make a motion to have those included, and they'll probably be included because they're pertinent to the case. But what ends up happening is that now you are disclosing not just to the prosecution, but to the complainant and the complainant's lawyer, which is court appointed now and court paid for, government paid for lawyer for the complainant, right? You are now exposing them to the evidence that you have that you are going to use in your defense. And so they can change their fucking story to conform to the evidence before they testify.
And I see that all
all of the rape training, all of the sexual assault myth training, right, that these judges are going to be undergoing, right, tells them that, oh, when women lie, when they fabricate details, when they lie about what they did afterwards, when they, when even if they pursue a further relationship with the accused, right, none of that can be used to cast doubt on their claims, right? Because those are rape myths.
That all comes out of American law, which is what the actual topic we're discussing is. And this is the situation with Betsy DeVos. They're one of the reasons why feminists are fighting so hard. They're already having a huge conniption fit about this discussion taking place at all. And one of the reasons they're opposing men's rights activists being included in the discussion is because we talk about the types of issues that Karen has brought up here. And these are all issues that, with respect to Title IX, they're not just in the legal system, they're ramped up another notch, because on top of the believe the woman charge, on top of the idea that a woman's sexual history doesn't say anything about what she might have been choosing that particular night, the idea that the way a woman dresses might not indicate whether she was or was not willing that night, and so on. all of those things have been used to basically set it up so that the guy doesn't have a defense at all in university cases. And the fact that we've been talking about this for years, since not since Title IX, but since the Dear Colleague letter came out in 2011, and the fact that we were talking about it prior to that when the arguments were being made that led to the Dear Colleague letter, that all basically means that if we get this discussion through, if we get attention drawn by legislators to the damage that is being done by this lack of due process, they're going to change the law. They're not going to have any choice. They're going to have to recognize the fact that Title IX is outdated, that turning the Dear Colleague letter into the Campus Save Act was a bad move, that damage is being done to not just young men's lives in the specific instances of these cases, but young men's ability to have an education beyond high school because they cannot safely enter college in this environment. Feminists cannot have this discussion taking place. They cannot have this discussion taking place out of their control even more than they cannot have it taking place. Because the moment that we are included, the moment that we are allowed to speak up, the moment that we are allowed to point out the type of discussion or type of dysfunction that Karen described in the system, and the moment that we are allowed to point out the impact it is having at universities, they're fucked. So they don't consent to this discussion.
Oh no,
they have to push to have it anyway.
Absolutely. And
Betsy DeVos absolutely needs your support. Every listener, everybody that is involved in the men's rights movement, if you are in the United States, or you could potentially be going to school in the United States, you should be contacting United States legislators and urging them to back Betsy DeVos in her intent to have this conversation and to include everybody's perspectives. I don't want to boot feminist perspectives out of the conversation. I don't want them to be the only perspective allowed in the conversation.
I also want to add that there are legislators, there are politicians who have stood up for this in the past, right? Earl Earhart, a state rep in Georgia, who was sitting on the Education Appropriations Committee. He was the chair, right? 2 years ago, I believe, held up the Dear Call. He had the mother of a young man falsely accused, testify before that committee. And then he held up the Dear Colleague letter and he said, this is a fiat from on high. It does not have the force of law because it was not debated in any legislature and it was not passed as a bill. It does not have the force of policy because it did not have to pass any kind of administrative process, right? It is merely the opinion of one bureaucrat in the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education. That is all it is. It has no force of law. It has no policy enforcement mechanism, right? It is just a threat from a bureaucrat. And he said to the assembled presidents of the universities in Georgia, he said, until and unless you are willing to let me know that you are prepared to protect the due process rights of your students, do not come looking to me for money.
The only problem is
that is a guy with at least as many balls as Brian has.
Yeah, and he's right to a degree. The only problem is the way the law works with respect to education department policy is that if the education department writes a policy, they have to submit it to Congress, and consent is assumed. Congress has to say no. If Congress doesn't say no within 45 days, that policy is enforceable as if it is law. So colleges were kind of fucked. They had to deal with that.
No. But the
I mean, him standing up was good, but the problem is it does actually have to be reversed now. And it does twice now, because first there was the policy being enforceable as law. Now there's the Campus Save Act. And that's Campus Save Act is predicated on Title IX, which was outdated within a couple of years of passing in the first place. And that's why it's had all this tweaking. They needed to justify continuing to enforce it and having people employed to continue to enforce it when there was nothing to enforce. So they created new things to enforce. They moved the goalpost so that they would still have goals to meet.
Well, it was about, like, Title IX was about sports. I mean,
it wasn't. It had nothing to do with sports. When it was passed, when it was initially passed, sports was in fact, collegiate sports wasn't even a universal thing with universities or high schools at the time. Sports programs have been built quite a bit since then. It was passed to address the fact that in some areas of study where it was traditional for women to get degrees that they were never going to use as a condition of employment, but actually just run around telling everybody, yes, I'm a lawyer, yes, I'm a doctor, but they don't practice. Those areas limited how many women could take that area of study. Well, by the 70s, women were working in those fields when they took those courses of study, and colleges hadn't kept up. And it's just the way things happen in life. Society moves forward, and then businesses and universities and the government has to catch up. And so feminists went to the law to get, or to Congress to get a law passed to force colleges to catch up. And colleges caught up, and the law became obsolete, and then they started dicking around with sports.
Well, all I know is that I was sitting because the woman who was responsible for Title IX, I forget her name, but she was the one. She was the one, and she was being honored at the 2012 National Organization for Women National Conference, okay, that I attended. And I watched her speech, and she said, and I have granddaughters who tell me, Grandma, I just can't bring myself to care where a soccer ball goes. And I'm so disappointed because, you know, this legislation is there for them. And I'm like, or you could be like, yeah, my granddaughters don't care where.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's not what it was originally passed for. It's not what it was originally billed as. It's not what they sold it to Congress on. Now, they made it a goal later to go through, and they didn't use it to increase women's sports. It never actually got used to increase the availability of athletic teams for women. All they've ever used it for was to attack the availability of teams for men when there was not parity of interest between men and women in sports. Yeah. So it was like, she might be blowing that line out to everybody, but it's not what it was for. And I'm going to change this back to the dealing with the Betsy DeVos issue one more time, because I didn't tell people how to contact Congress, and I know I keep mentioning this and everything. If you go to www.usa.gov/elected-officials, there are two places you can click, one for U.S. senators, one for U.S. representatives. You can also contact state governors and state legislators. There's an online contact form for the White House on that page. You can, if you really want to get into it, you can contact mayors and county executives from this page as well. You can learn how to contact everybody. The most important people at this point to contact, though, are going to be the president, the senators, and the representatives at the U.S. level, because that's where this law is, and that's where it's going to have to be addressed. Again, and, you know, that's usa.gov/elected-officials.
On that note, I noticed two things. First of all, if we're going to talk about contacting representatives, I do believe net neutrality is once again trying to be fucked with. So that's something you guys can check out. And there's plenty of outlets that offer you quick links to that. On the other hand, I noticed on Facebook there is a new feature that allows you to contact a representative as part of one of those, like upload a photo, do an emoji. One of them now is add a representative, which is just wild. And go explore that and have fun with that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, my dog is chewing a jacket. She's chewing the zipper of a jacket, and
weird timing on that. Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's all right.
But basically, no, you can click something, in other words, to draw the attention of a representative to a Facebook post now.
Good.
Cherry?
That's useful.
Yeah, basically, yeah. That's what it seems like. I'm, let's see, I usually go through my page, though, so I'm not sure if it's, like, for every person or, like, page owners. I would assume it's just everything. So when I go in to write something, there's a new feature. You have, like, add photos, then add what you're doing, then check in, like, location. And the one after that says encourage people to contact their government representatives. It's, like, a little Parthenon, like little like column house thingy, and there's a representative tab that if you click on that, you can just start typing, and instantly there's a scroll bar that, or a little menu that opens up that has United States Senate, United States House of Representatives, Mayor of Sacramento for me, Daryl Steinberg next is the third one for me because obviously location. Then Kevin Kiley, California State Assembly member, et cetera, Governor of California, Jerry Brown, he's down here. All of my senators. So those are the immediate like 10 or so that pop up for me, which are my local U.S. senators, governor, lieutenant governor, California State Senator, California State Assemblyman for District 6, mayor of Sacramento, and then a United States Senate and United States House of Representatives in general, so you can find out who your specific representatives are. So yeah, that seems to be a thing that is now attached to Facebook posts. So fun.
Huh. All right. Well, yeah, guys, look into it. That could be handy. But also go to the Congress website that Hannah brought up, or whatever it is that you do, because I think we actually have a really strong opportunity to overturn Title IX, and I know that the Trump administration was looking at it, but we talked about that on another show. Plus, we have this Betsy DeVos thing. Hey, maybe we can actually make something happen in these next 4 years that is actually something people can celebrate. So.
It is, and one of the things too is that Betsy DeVos said that it was haunting to hear the testimony of a mother of a wrongfully accused student, telling her how she, walked in on her son in the process of attempting to kill himself, right, because of this accusation. And she said it was haunting, right? And, as much as I wish that we were logical creatures, as much as I wish that we were able to just look at the logic of everything, right? It is those deeply emotional stories, often told by women, right, that are going to actually sway people who are in a position to change things. And so we need to, number one, we need to be writing to legislators and people in positions to make these decisions. And we also need to be writing in support of the people who are already, like Earl Earhart in Georgia, who are already standing up, and Philip Davies in the UK, and other people who have actually stood up in public and made their feelings and their opinions known, and bucked the essentially the narrative. So we need to pressure politicians to do what we want, but we also need to support the politicians who are already speaking up in the ways that we want. And that I can't stress how, enough how important that is, to let them know that we have their back. Because, when I look at what happened with the alimony reform bills in Florida and Governor Rick Scott, and how he was, you had these bills that were supported by more than 70% of the population. You had them pass both houses with flying bipartisan colors, right? And they get up to him being either being, going to sign or not sign. And the National Organization for Women in 2013 convinced him to veto the bill, right? And then he got reelected. And then he vetoed another similar bill in 2016, right? So essentially, we really need to not only hold our politicians to account for this, but we also need to support the politicians who are actually doing good work and speaking out. So just do it. And politely worded letters, but be firm and tell them how you really feel.
Just do it!
Just do it.
Don't let your dreams be memes!
But
it never hurts to let them know. Like, if you're a Republican writing to a Republican, you tell them that you're a Republican voter. If you're a Democrat writing to a Democrat, you tell them you're a Democrat voter. Both sides need to hear that their own sides, constituents have specific opinions on this.
Also, if you're a Democrat voter in Georgia, and I believe Earl Earhart is a Republican, right? Write to him and say, if you can actually fucking do something with this, you might be able to convince me to vote Republican. This is how important this is to me. Due process rights, right? The fucking Magna Carta is important enough to me that I would switch sides and vote for a Republican.
It's not without precedent. I mean, there were a lot of people who felt that way about fixing the economy after the Jimmy Carter era, that Reagan era Democrats that became Republicans, my parents were some of them, because of Reagan's successes, economic successes. So this is something that politicians are going to remember, and being able to tell your political opponent party that this issue could be a switch issue. That's enough that can actually convince them to make a decision on it as well.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. If you don't vote for this, I'm leaving this party forever. Or if you do vote for this, I would consider voting for you, even though I never have in the past.
Now, and you also have the aspect that due process is a human rights issue. And it affects everybody. It affects both sexes. It affects families. It affects individuals. It could affect the politicians themselves in the future and their families as well. So that's something to write about. And then there's also, it's important to let your various politicians, especially if you're female, your various politicians know that you do not afford feminism control of women's issues. That this is not, they don't speak for all women. So this is a power that women in the movement can have to step up and say, hey, just because they're saying this in the name of women doesn't mean women agree with them, and it doesn't mean that you should just automatically kowtow to them because they're saying because women. Don't let because women be a reason why you would agree to sell out our due process rights.
Yeah, no, and essentially letting politicians know that, feminism is a voice, but it can't be allowed to be the only voice.
Okay, well, I guess that's all really great advice. I'm glad that we got that all out. We're gonna go ahead and close out the show, but before we do, I want to mention a couple last couple things. Our fundraiser is still ongoing. We are super close to reaching the next goal. I hope that we can. We may do a stream to try to raise some money if we need to. I just want to say thank you guys so much for all the help that you've given so far. It is extremely humbling. I didn't really think that I just didn't really think it would go through. So I just want to say thanks a lot for that. Although I won't know more about my condition until next week, Wednesday. That is when I will be talking to the oncologists and the urologists and all those other people, whatever, that do the thing with the cancer stuff. So, but as an aside, speaking of cancer, it turns out that Sevvie Rose, who is a YouTuber we've had on here before, she also has had cancer in the past, and it looks like it's returning, or it's seeing a comeback. So she is asking for help. I included a link in the low bar to her Patreon. Go ahead and check it out. Also, go to her YouTube channel and check it out as well. She does a lot of great work helping out homeless men as a homeless woman herself. So, Sevvie, that is for you. She is a very gracious and awesome lady. Please help her out. Yeah, I guess that's really it. I want to thank Karen, Hannah, Prim, and Anna for coming on today, and talking about these important topics, especially this stuff going on with Betsy DeVos. I think that I am filled with optimism, but we'll see. This thing could be overturned, so let's hope that it is, and it'll be a massive victory for us. In the meantime, we are going to now move on to the after show, where we'll be discussing another article which is so incredibly demonic I can't even explain. It's entitled, "I'm Done Pretending Men Are Safe, Even My Own Sons." This is not parody. This is not a Poe. This is a woman who fears men so much she even fears her own kids. So, we'll be reading that in the after show. If you want to join us in the after show, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And we will see you next time.